Good evening, and welcome back to the Sleepy History channel. Tonight, we're not just reading history, we're peering through the veils of time into a realm where sunlight and silence ruled. We're exploring the enigmatic world of ancient Egypt, a civilization of splendor, mystery, and inequality. Beneath its golden monuments and eternal sands, stories of devotion, resilience, and quiet suffering lie buried in the dust of time. I want to extend a warm greeting to you, dear listener. Whether you are curled up under the covers, preparing to drift into sleep, or simply seeking a quiet moment of reflection, I'm so grateful you've chosen to spend this twilight hour with me. If you feel like sharing, let me know where in the world you're listening from, or what time of day it is for you right now. It's a small joy to imagine this circle of gentle souls, dreamers scattered across the globe, united by a love for the whispers of the past. For now, get cozy, settle in, and let the whispers of the Nile and the desert winds carry you away. Our journey begins where the sun rises over the river's edge, and the pyramids cast their long shadows across a world divided by privilege and pain. Now let's begin. This is ancient Egypt, a civilization of wonder and might that endured for over 3,000 years. From the towering monuments of Giza to the glittering treasures of Tutankhamun's tomb, it's a world that has long captivated the imaginations of people across the globe. But life in the land of the Nile was not all gold and glory. Beneath the veneer of power and prosperity lay a society with a stark divide between the haves and have-nots. And perhaps no group felt this inequality more keenly than women. To be sure, women in ancient Egypt enjoyed some freedoms and legal rights that set them apart from their counterparts in other ancient societies. They could own property, conduct business transactions, and even initiate divorce proceedings. Some royal and upper-class women, like Nefertiti and Cleopatra, even wielded significant political influence. But make no mistake, this was still a deeply patriarchal world, one where women were considered inferior to men, both socially and legally. They were barred from holding positions of real power, shut out of the priesthood and the scribal class. They couldn't vote, couldn't serve on juries, couldn't independently make contracts. In short, they were second-class citizens. From birth to death, an ancient Egyptian woman's life was largely defined by her relationship to the men around her. As a child, she was under the control of her father. As an adult, her husband. If widowed, her son. At every stage, she needed a male guardian to represent her interests and make decisions on her behalf. This lack of autonomy, combined with limited economic and educational opportunities, meant that most women, even among the upper classes, had very circumscribed lives. If they were lucky enough to be literate, it was usually just enough to keep household accounts. Their career options were mostly limited to domestic work within the household. And of course, their primary role was to bear children, many children, to replace the staggering number lost to disease and accidents. It's estimated that around 1 in 3 women in ancient Egypt died in childbirth. Without modern medicine, even a seemingly uncomplicated pregnancy or delivery could quickly turn deadly. Those who did survive might be fortunate to live into their 30s or 40s, old age by the standards of the time. But even a long life was no picnic. An elderly widow with no sons to support her might find herself cast out on the street, forced to beg for food and shelter. The lucky ones might be taken in by other family or welcomed into the temple as a servant. But many surely met lonely, impoverished ends. For a glimpse of the realities of womanhood in ancient Egypt, we need look no further than the life of Queen Nefertiti. You might know her as the preternaturally beautiful face immortalized in limestone, gazing out across eternity with her enigmatic smile. And indeed, Nefertiti was renowned for her great beauty. But as a woman, even a queen, her power was always contingent on the whims of the men around her. As the first wife of the pharaoh Akhenaten, Nefertiti enjoyed great influence and prestige. She was depicted alongside her husband with a frequency and on a scale unprecedented for a queen. Some scholars even argue that she may have ruled as a co-regent for a time. But when Akhenaten died, Nefertiti disappears abruptly from the historical record. Her images and inscriptions were obliterated, her name erased as if she had never existed. Many Egyptologists believe this was the work of Akhenaten's successor, the young pharaoh Tutankhamun, as he sought to restore the old gods and orthodox religion that Akhenaten had abolished. The lesson that even the most powerful woman was still, in the end, at the mercy of the men who controlled the kingdom. Of course, the vast majority of women in ancient Egypt were not royalty or even nobility. They were the farmers, weavers, bakers, and brewers who formed the backbone of the Egyptian economy. And for these women, daily life was full of unrelenting labor. Without access to education, most worked in and around the home, grinding grain, baking bread, brewing beer, spinning linen, and tending to children and animals. It was hot, dirty, exhausting work, the same back-breaking grind day after day with little rest or respite. Personal hygiene was another challenge in an age before indoor plumbing or sanitation. While the wealthy might enjoy the relative luxury of a limestone toilet seat and small bathing room, most Egyptians relieved themselves in chamber pots or in the river itself. An unsavory prospect, given that the Nile was also the primary source of drinking water. Diseases like typhoid, cholera, and dysentery were rampant. Surviving to adulthood at all was an accomplishment in a time when up to half of all children died before the age of 5. Those who did reach maturity usually didn't have long to savor it. Archaeologists tell us that the average life expectancy for a woman in ancient Egypt was around 30 years old, assuming she was fortunate enough to survive the gauntlet of repeated pregnancies and childbirths. Childbearing usually began early and ended late. It wasn't uncommon for girls to be married off as young as 12 or 13, usually to a much older man. These age gaps could be significant, 20, even 30 years between husband and wife. A 14-year-old girl might find herself married to a man in his 40s, a disparity that only underscored the power imbalance between the sexes. Successive pregnancies would follow, one after the other, in an attempt to produce as many healthy children as possible, especially sons to carry on the family name and lineage. With little to no formal medical care, each pregnancy was a game of Russian roulette. Any number of complications from preeclampsia to obstructed labor could easily result in the death of mother, baby, or both. The ancient Egyptians did have some surprisingly advanced medical texts for the time, many of which have survived to the present day. The 𝐬𝐵𝐴 papyrus, for example, is a 110-page scroll from around 1500 BCE that covers a wide range of medical conditions and treatments, from heart disease to depression to birth control. But as advanced as some of this knowledge was, it was still primarily focused on the treatment of men. Women's health issues, from menstrual disorders to breast cancer, received comparatively little attention. And of course, without antibiotics, antiseptics, or any real understanding of germs and hygiene, even the most skilled physician could do little to stem the tide of infectious diseases that cut down so many young mothers in their prime. Against this grim backdrop, it's all the more remarkable when we encounter women in ancient Egypt who managed to rise above their prescribed roles and leave a mark on history. Women like Merit-Ptah, the first recorded female physician in the world. Merit-Ptah lived around 2700 BCE, during the early period of the Old Kingdom. She bore the title Chief Physician and appears to have attended primarily to the needs of women at the royal court. While little is known about her life, Her very existence testifies to the fact that at least some women in ancient Egypt were able to break through the gender barriers and achieve positions of skill and prestige. Ironically though, even as real Egyptian women struggled for basic freedoms and dignity, their idealized forms were being elevated to divine status in the official state religion. Goddesses like Isis, Hathor, Sekhmet and Nut played vital roles in the Egyptian pantheon, reflecting different aspects of femininity: fertility and motherhood, love and beauty, wrath and warfare, creation and destruction. But here too, we see the double standard at play. While goddesses were venerated and temples built in their honor, mortal women were still excluded from the higher ranks of the priesthood. The loftiest religious role most women could hope to attain was that of a chantress, a kind of singer or musician who participated in temple ceremonies. But they were strictly segregated from the inner sanctums and the holiest of rites, which remained the exclusive domain of male priests. One of the few exceptions to this rule was Iset, chantress of Amun, during the 23rd dynasty of the Third Intermediate Period, around 800 BCE. Iset bore the grandiloquent title, Chief of the Harem of Amun, which despite its lascivious connotations, actually referred to an order of priestesses dedicated to the god Amun. As one of Amun's chantresses, Iset would have sung and performed music during religious festivals and processions. She also would have had a role in managing the sizable estates and holdings belonging to Amun's cult. It was a rare position of some authority for a woman, but still ultimately subordinate to the male high priests. For royal and upper-class women, life may have been materially comfortable, but it was no less circumscribed by rigid gender expectations. Wives and mothers of the pharaoh might wield some degree of influence behind the scenes, but their power was always borrowed, never fully their own. Even mighty queens like Tai, Nefertiti, and Nefertari governed at the pleasure of their divine husbands, and could be summarily cast aside when they were no longer of use or interest. In 3,000 years of ancient Egyptian history, only a handful of women ever managed to rule as pharaohs in their own right, and even they did so only briefly and with varying degrees of success. The most famous of these is undoubtedly Hatshepsut, the fifth pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, who ruled for over 20 prosperous years in the 15th century BCE. The daughter of the great warrior pharaoh Thutmose III, Hatshepsut was never supposed to inherit the throne in her own right. But when her husband and half-brother Thutmose II died prematurely, leaving only an infant son to succeed him, Hatshepsut stepped into the breach, first as regent and then audaciously as pharaoh herself. To legitimize her reign, Hatshepsut set about systematically masculinizing her image. In statues and reliefs, she is depicted wearing the traditional pharaonic regalia, the crown, the false beard, even the shendi kilt. She referred to herself using male pronouns and titles. For all intents and purposes, she became a man in both form and function. And by all accounts, she ruled well and effectively, ushering in a period of peace and plenty for Egypt. She expanded trade networks, commissioned grand building projects like her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, and even mounted a successful military campaign in Nubia. But for all her achievements, Hatshepsut's legacy was ultimately not secure. After her death, her names and images were systematically chiseled out of monuments, her statues smashed, her accomplishments attributed to the male pharaohs who came before and after. It was as if the powers that be were trying to erase the memory of a woman who dared to rule as a man. Such was the fate of even the most exceptional women in ancient Egypt. No matter how high they might rise or what they might achieve, their place in society was always precarious, their hard-won gains easily eroded or erased entirely by the capricious currents of male-dominated power structures. As the sun sets over the Nile and the last embers of our story flicker and fade, it's hard not to feel a sense of melancholy for all the women of ancient Egypt whose lives were so constrained, whose potential was so blunted by the rigid hierarchies of their time. For every Nefertiti or Hatshepsut who managed to break the mold, how many thousands of anonymous women lived and died in obscurity, their hopes and dreams buried with them in the sand? But perhaps there is a glimmer of hope to be found in their stories as well. A reminder that even in the most oppressive of circumstances, the human spirit still yearns to be free, to stretch beyond the confines of the roles and expectations placed upon it. That women, then as now, have always found ways to resist, to persevere, to leave their mark, however subtle or fleeting. So let us remember the women of ancient Egypt, both the great and the small. Let us honor their struggles and their triumphs, their joys and their sorrows. And let us continue to work towards a world where every woman, no matter her station or circumstance, has the freedom and the power to shape her own destiny. And with that, my friend, we come to the end of our journey for tonight. I hope you've enjoyed this bit of armchair Egyptology and that you've managed to drift a bit closer to the land of Nod in the process. Until next time, I wish you the sweetest of dreams, filled perhaps with visions of golden barks and shining pyramids. Good night. Despite the challenges women faced, there were some extraordinary females who managed to make their mark on ancient Egyptian society against all odds. One such woman was Hatshepsut, the longest reigning female pharaoh in Egyptian history. Born into the royal family, Hatshepsut was never intended to rule in her own right. But when her husband and half-brother 𝐓𝐡𝐚𝐧 II died young, leaving only an infant son as heir, Hatshepsut stepped up to serve as regent. Rather than fade into the background once her stepson came of age, Hatshepsut made a bold and unprecedented move. She declared herself pharaoh, taking on the full royal titulary and regalia. Depictions show her wearing the traditional false beard and male clothing of a king. She even went so far as to declare herself the daughter of the chief deity Amun, asserting divine legitimacy to rule. For over 20 prosperous years, Hatshepsut governed Egypt as pharaoh, not merely queen. She oversaw ambitious building projects, including her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, with its elegant colonnades and towering cliffs. Expeditions to the fabled land of Punt brought back luxury goods and exotic wonders. Unlike many male rulers who focused on military campaigns, Hatshepsut's reign was characterized by peace, stability, and economic success. Despite her many accomplishments, Hatshepsut's legacy was nearly erased after her death. Her stepson and successor 𝐓𝐴𝐚𝐧 III, perhaps resenting her power, had her name and image chiseled off monuments. For centuries, she was forgotten, reduced to a mere footnote in the grand arc of Egyptian history. But modern Egyptologists piece together her story from the scraps of history she left behind. It's a testament to Hatshepsut's tenacity and skill that she was able to rule successfully in a world where women were systematically denied political power. One can only imagine how many other women of ambition and intelligence were never given the chance to make their mark. Hatshepsut's tale is a reminder that even in the face of oppression, there will always be those who refuse to be constrained by the limitations placed upon them. Her reign was like a shimmering oasis in the desert, a brief respite from the unrelenting harshness of a world built for men. But for the vast majority of Egyptian women, life remained an endless cycle of domestic labor, childbearing, and subservience. From birth to death, they were at the mercy of the men in their lives. Fathers, husbands, brothers, sons. Their world was circumscribed by the walls of home and hut, their horizons limited to the daily grind of cooking, cleaning, and caregiving. Imagine for a moment the life of an ordinary Egyptian woman. Let's call her Nebet. She wakes before dawn to prepare breakfast for her husband and children. The house is soon filled with the scent of baking bread as she grinds the grain, kneads the dough, and stokes the fire. With the morning meal done, 𝐬𝐻𝐻 turns to her other chores. There's always mending to be done, torn clothing to patch, frayed baskets to repair. She draws water from the well, her strong arms straining as she hoists the heavy jug onto her shoulder. In the corner, a baby fusses, and she pauses her work to offer a breast. As the day grows hotter, 𝐬𝐻𝐻 joins the other women of the village down by the river to do the washing. They slap the wet clothes against the rocks, gossiping and laughing together as they work. For a moment, in the easy camaraderie of female company, 𝐬𝐻𝐻 almost forgets her troubles, but return to them she must. In the evening, footsore and weary, she prepares the evening meal. Her husband comes in from the fields, tired and hungry. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 serves him first, the choicest morsels, as a good wife should. She eats what's left, often with the children. There is no rest for 𝐬𝐻𝐻, even when night falls. She is expected to be available to her husband, to submit to his desires regardless of her own wants or needs. Pregnancy is an ever-present possibility, and with it the spectre of death in childbed. This is the unending cycle of 𝐬𝐻𝐻's life, from maiden to mother to crone. She ages before her time, her body worn out by hardship and toil. If she's lucky, her children, particularly her sons, will care for her in her twilight years. If not, she faces the prospect of destitution and abandonment. 𝐬𝐻𝐻's story is the story of countless Egyptian women, their names and faces lost to history. They left no monuments, commanded no armies, wrote no great works of literature. But it was their unseen, unrecognized labor that sustained Egyptian civilization for millennia. In a society that deemed them lesser, they found ways to support each other, to carve out small spaces of agency and expression in a world that granted them little of either. As we contemplate these women's lives from the distance of centuries, it's easy to feel a sense of righteous anger at the injustice of it all. But perhaps we might also feel a sense of kinship, a recognition of the quiet courage it takes to endure in the face of adversity. In their resilience, their resourcefulness, their ability to find light in the darkness, these long-ago women speak to the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. For all the grandeur of its temples and tombs, the true wonder of ancient Egypt lies in the lives of its ordinary people, the farmers and craftsmen, the servants and laborers, and yes, the women who toiled in obscurity to create a civilization that endures in memory to this day. As we run our fingers over the cool stone of a sphinx or trace the graceful lines of hieroglyphs, let us remember the invisible hands that made it all possible. In honoring the women of ancient Egypt, we honor the women of every time and place who have carried on in the face of hardship, who have found ways to thrive in a world that too often sought to diminish them. Their story is a reminder that history is not just the tale of kings and conquerors, but of the everyday struggles and triumphs of ordinary people. As we drift off to sleep, let our dreams be filled not with the glittering gold of pharaohs, but with the warm, work-worn hands of the women who made Egypt possible. Let us carry their memory forward, a tribute to the enduring power of the human spirit to endure, to overcome, to leave a mark on the world, however small or fleeting. In the end, perhaps that is the greatest legacy of all. Part 4. The scorching desert sun beats down mercilessly as we turn our attention to the realm of health and hygiene for women in ancient Egypt. While the grand monuments and opulent lifestyles of the elite may paint a picture of prosperity, the reality for most women was far less idyllic. The lack of modern medical knowledge and sanitation meant that disease and mortality were constant companions, lurking in the shadows of everyday life. For women, the perils of childbirth loomed large. Without the benefits of modern medicine, bringing new life into the world was a treacherous endeavor. The ancient Egyptians revered fertility and placed great importance on motherhood, but the price of this veneration was often paid in blood. It is estimated that as many as 1 in 3 women died during childbirth, their lives cut short by complications that today might be easily managed. The sorrow of a child lost before even drawing breath, or a mother taken too soon, leaving her family to mourn, was a tragically common occurrence. Even for those who survived the trials of labor, the specter of illness was never far away. The lack of proper sanitation meant that diseases could spread like wildfire through crowded cities and villages. For the poor, living in close quarters with little access to clean water or waste disposal, the risk was even greater. While the wealthy elite might have enjoyed some rudimentary plumbing and toilets, for most women, the daily realities of managing hygiene were a constant struggle. It's not that the ancient Egyptians were ignorant of the need for cleanliness and health. Indeed, they left behind a number of advanced medical texts that showcase a surprising understanding of the human body and various ailments. However, these texts were almost exclusively focused on the health of men, with women's needs often overlooked or misunderstood. The female body was a mystery, and one that was often viewed with suspicion or even fear. Against this backdrop of medical inequality, it is all the more remarkable to consider the story of Merit Ptah, the first recorded female physician in history. Living during the Second Dynasty, around 2700 BCE, Merit Ptah was a trailblazer in a field dominated by men. As a chief physician, she would have been responsible for tending to the health needs of the royal court. But it is her work with women that truly sets her apart. In a time when women's health was often neglected, Merit Ptah made it her mission to care for her fellow women. She would have treated a wide range of ailments, from the everyday aches and pains to the life-threatening complications of childbirth. Her knowledge and skill must have been extraordinary as she navigated the complex world of ancient Egyptian medicine with a focus on the unique needs of women. One can only imagine the relief and gratitude that her patients must have felt, knowing that there was someone who understood their struggles and was dedicated to their well-being. Merit Ptah's legacy echoes down through the ages, a reminder that even in the most challenging of circumstances, there have always been those who fought for the health and dignity of women. As we leave Merit Ptah to her vital work, we turn our gaze to the world of fashion and beauty in ancient Egypt. For women, the pressure to conform to certain standards of appearance was intense. The ideal woman was youthful, slender, and exquisitely adorned, with makeup, jewelry, and elaborate wigs and hairpieces. The art and imagery of ancient Egypt frequently depicts women in these highly stylized forms, their physical attributes exaggerated and idealized. But the reality of achieving these beauty standards was far less glamorous. Wigs, often made from human hair, could be heavy and uncomfortable, especially in the sweltering heat of the desert sun. Women would shave their heads to accommodate these wigs, a practice that was both time-consuming and potentially dangerous, as razors were often made from bronze or flint. Makeup too was a double-edged sword. The dramatic kohl-rimmed eyes and painted lips that we associate with ancient Egyptian beauty were created using a variety of ingredients, some of which were toxic. Lead, copper, and even arsenic were used to create vibrant colors, and the long-term effects of these substances on the skin and body can only be imagined. The pressure to maintain a youthful appearance was particularly intense, as aging was seen as a sign of decline and decay. Women would go to great lengths to preserve their youth, using a variety of creams, oils, and other concoctions to stave off the effects of time. The idea that a woman's value was tied to her physical appearance was deeply ingrained in Egyptian society, and the consequences for failing to meet these standards could be severe. But perhaps no woman in ancient Egypt felt the weight of these expectations more keenly than Cleopatra VII, the last queen of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Born into a world of opulence and intrigue, Cleopatra was renowned for her beauty, wit, and intelligence. She used her physical charms as a tool of statecraft, famously seducing both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony in order to secure her position and protect her kingdom. But for all her power and influence, Cleopatra was still bound by the same beauty standards as other women of her time. She was known for her elaborate wigs, heavily kohled eyes, and exquisite jewelry, all of which were carefully crafted to create an image of allure and mystery. Her very name has become synonymous with a kind of timeless, exotic beauty. In the end, however, even Cleopatra could not escape the realities of life as a woman in ancient Egypt. Despite her many accomplishments, she is often remembered more for her appearance and her romantic entanglements than for her political acumen or leadership skills. Her story is a reminder of the ways in which women, even at the highest levels of society, were often reduced to their physical attributes and judged by their ability to conform to narrow standards of beauty. As we drift deeper into the world of ancient Egyptian women, we find ourselves in the realm of religion and spirituality. Here, too, we see glimpses of female power and influence, but always within the confines of a patriarchal system. Women were not excluded from religious life entirely, but their roles were often limited and circumscribed. The ancient Egyptian pantheon was populated by a vast array of deities, some of whom were female. Goddesses like Isis, Hathor, and Sekhmet were revered for their strength, fertility, and protectiveness, and their cults attracted devotees from all walks of life. Women would often call upon these goddesses for aid and comfort, particularly in matters related to childbirth and motherhood. But while these female deities were powerful in their own right, they were often seen as subordinate to their male counterparts. The chief gods of the Egyptian pantheon, Ra, Osiris, and Horus, were all male, and their stories and mythologies tended to center around their exploits and achievements. Female deities, by contrast, were often relegated to supporting roles. Their power derived from their relationships to male gods. This gender imbalance was reflected in the priesthood as well. While women could serve as priestesses in certain temples, their roles were often limited to secondary positions like chantress or singer. These women would participate in rituals and ceremonies, but they were not permitted to perform the most important rites or to hold positions of real authority within the temple hierarchy. There were some exceptions to this rule, however. One such example is the story of 𝐸𝐴𝑡, a chantress who served in the temple of Amun during the 20th dynasty. 𝐸𝐴𝑡 was a woman of great talent and ambition, and she rose through the ranks of the temple hierarchy to become a divine adoratrix, a position of significant influence and prestige. As a divine adoratrix, 𝐸𝐴𝑡 would have been responsible for performing important rituals and ceremonies in honor of the god Amun. She would have been a key figure in the religious life of the community, and her position would have afforded her a degree of wealth and status that was rare for women in ancient Egypt. But even as a divine adoratrix, 𝐸𝐴𝑡 was still subject to the limitations placed on women in Egyptian society. Her power was ultimately derived from her relationship to the god Amun, and her authority was always subject to the will of the male priests who outranked her. She may have been a trailblazer in her own right, but she was still operating within a system that placed women in a subordinate position. For most women in ancient Egypt, religious life was centered around the domestic sphere. They were expected to worship household deities related to fertility, childbirth, and family life, and their religious observances were often tied to their roles as wives and mothers. The idea of women as the keepers of domestic piety was deeply ingrained in Egyptian culture, and it reinforced the notion that a woman's primary purpose was to bear and raise children. As we leave the world of religion and spirituality, we find ourselves in the glittering realm of royalty and the ruling class. Here too, we see glimpses of female power and influence. but always within the confines of a patriarchal system. Women could, on rare occasions, ascend to the highest levels of power in ancient Egypt, but their authority was always contingent on their relationships to men. One of the most famous examples of a female ruler in ancient Egypt is Hatshepsut, who ruled as pharaoh during the 18th dynasty. Hatshepsut was a remarkable figure in many ways: a skilled politician, a shrewd diplomat, and a successful military leader. But what makes her story truly extraordinary is the fact that she was able to rule at all, given the deeply entrenched gender norms of Egyptian society. Hatshepsut came to power as a regent for her young stepson, �thutmose III, after the death of her husband, �thutmose II. But rather than simply serving as a placeholder until �thutmose III came of age, Hatshepsut took on the full powers and trappings of kingship, even going so far as to depict herself in male clothing and with a false beard in official artwork. For more than 2 decades, Hatshepsut ruled Egypt as pharaoh, overseeing a period of great prosperity and artistic achievement. She commissioned grand building projects, expanded trade networks, and led successful military campaigns. By all accounts, she was a capable and effective leader, and her reign was marked by stability and growth. But despite her many accomplishments, Hatshepsut's legacy was ultimately shaped by the fact that she was a woman in a man's world. After her death, her successor �thutmose III embarked on a campaign to erase her memory, defacing her monuments and removing her name from official records. While her reign was remarkable, it was also seen as an aberration, a temporary deviation from the natural order of things. Hatshepsut's story is a reminder of the ways in which women in ancient Egypt, even at the highest levels of society, were always subject to the whims and expectations of men. A woman might be able to rule as pharaoh, but her power was always contingent on the approval and acceptance of the men around her. And in the end, her legacy was often determined not by her own achievements, but by the way in which she was remembered, or forgotten, by the men who came after her. Part 5. As we come to the end of our journey through the lives of women in ancient Egypt, we are left with a sense of both awe and sorrow. The women we have encountered, from the humble village dweller to the mighty queen, were remarkable in their resilience, their strength, and their ability to carve out a place for themselves in a world that was often hostile to their very existence. But for all their accomplishments, these women were still ultimately bound by the same oppressive gender roles and expectations that have plagued women throughout history. They may have had moments of power and influence, but these were always tempered by the reality of their subordinate status in society. In ancient Egypt, women were revered in myth and art as the embodiments of fertility, beauty, and motherhood. But in reality, they were second-class citizens, their worth determined by their ability to bear children and maintain domestic harmony. They were excluded from positions of real power and authority, and their voices were often silenced or ignored. And yet, despite all of this, women in ancient Egypt found ways to assert their agency and make their mark on the world. They were healers and priestesses, artisans and entrepreneurs, queens and pharaohs. They left behind a legacy of resilience and determination that continues to inspire and challenge us to this day. As we drift off to sleep, let us hold these women in our hearts and minds. Let us remember their struggles and their triumphs, their joys and their sorrows. Let us honor their memory by continuing the fight for gender equality and justice in our own lives and in the world at large. And let us dream of a future in which all women, regardless of their circumstances, are able to live with dignity, autonomy, and respect. A future in which the contributions of women are valued and celebrated, not just in myth and legend, but in the everyday realities of life. For the women of ancient Egypt, and for women throughout history, this dream has been a long time coming. But as we close our eyes and let the sands of time sweep over us, we can take comfort in the knowledge that change is possible, that progress is happening, and that a better world is within our reach. So let us rest now, and let us dream of that world, a world in which every woman is free to be herself, to pursue her passions and her goals, to love and be loved, to live and to thrive. A world in which the stories of women are not just footnotes in the annals of history, but the very fabric of our shared human experience. And let us awaken tomorrow with renewed purpose and determination, ready to do our part in creating that world. For the women of ancient Egypt, and for women everywhere, the fight goes on. But together, we can make a difference. Together, we can build a future in which all women can live with the dignity and respect they deserve. As the scorching Egyptian sun beat down upon the bustling streets of Thebes, a young woman named 𝐒𝐴𝐻 hurried along, her eyes downcast to avoid the leering gazes of the men she passed. Though she came from a respected middle-class family as a woman in ancient Egypt, 𝐒𝐴𝐻's life was far from easy. Like most girls, she'd been married off at a young age to a man nearly twice her age, a common practice in a society where women were considered little more than property to be traded and bargained for. 𝐒𝐴𝐻's days were filled with endless domestic chores, grinding grain, baking bread, brewing beer, and tending to the needs of her husband and children. It was a life of drudgery, with little room for personal ambition or fulfillment. But 𝐒𝐴𝐻 knew she was one of the lucky ones. Many women in Egypt weren't even afforded the basic protections of marriage, left to fend for themselves in a world that viewed them as little more than objects for men's pleasure and service. As she made her way through the winding streets, 𝐒𝐴𝐻 couldn't help but feel a sense of envy as she passed by the grand temples and palaces that dominated the city skyline. In those hallowed halls, the elite men of Egypt's ruling class lived lives of luxury and power, while women like her were relegated to the shadows. Even the greatest of Egypt's queens, like the legendary Nefertiti, were ultimately beholden to the whims of the pharaohs they served. Nefertiti's story was one that had always fascinated 𝐒𝐴𝐻. As the chief wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, Nefertiti had risen to become one of the most powerful women in Egypt's history. Her beauty was renowned throughout the land, her likeness immortalized in countless statues and paintings. But for all her influence and status, Nefertiti's fate was ultimately tied to that of her husband. When Akhenaten had first come to power, he had shocked the nation by declaring that there was only one true god, Aten, the sun disk. He had ordered the construction of a grand new capital city, Amarna, dedicated to the worship of this strange new deity. And Nefertiti had been right there by his side, her name and image intertwined with his in the art and inscriptions of the new regime. But Akhenaten's religious revolution had been deeply unpopular with the powerful priests of the old gods, and after his death, they had worked tirelessly to erase his memory from history. Nefertiti, too, had disappeared from the record, her final fate unknown. Some said she had died alongside her husband, others that she had been banished to a remote desert outpost, but the truth was lost to the sands of time. For 𝐒𝐴𝐻, Nefertiti's story was a reminder of the precarious position that even the most powerful women in Egypt found themselves in. In a society where women were considered little more than extensions of the men in their lives, their fortunes could change in an instant with the shifting winds of politics and religion. And yet, as she made her way through the bustling marketplace, 𝐒𝐴𝐻 couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and resilience in the women around her. They may have been denied the same rights and freedoms as men, but they found ways to carve out their own spaces of agency and autonomy, in the tight-knit networks of female friends and family, in the quiet subversions of domestic life, in the whispered stories and songs passed down from mother to daughter. The women of Egypt found ways to resist and survive in a world that sought to deny them their humanity. As 𝐒𝐤𝐞𝐞𝐞 made her way back to her small mud brick house on the outskirts of the city, she reflected on the life that lay ahead of her. It would be a life of hard work and sacrifice, of bearing children and tending to the needs of her family. But it would also be a life lived on her own terms, in the company of the women who understood the struggles and joys of being a woman in ancient Egypt. In the years to come, 𝐒𝐤𝐞𝐞𝐞 would face many trials and hardships. She would lose children to disease and malnutrition, her body ravaged by the toll of multiple pregnancies. She would endure the scorn and abuse of men who saw her as little more than a possession to be used and discarded. But through it all, she would find strength in the bonds of sisterhood, in the knowledge that she was part of a long line of women who had endured and persevered through the centuries. As night fell over the city, 𝐒𝐤𝐞𝐞𝐞 settled down to sleep, her body exhausted from the day's labors. But even in her dreams, she could not escape the weight of her womanhood. She dreamed of Nefertiti, resplendent in her royal regalia, her face serene and untroubled even as the world around her crumbled. She dreamed of her own mother and grandmother, their hands rough and calloused from a lifetime of work, their eyes filled with the wisdom of generations. And she dreamed of a future where women could be more than just wives and mothers, where they could be scholars and artists, leaders and rebels. It was a future that seemed impossibly distant, but one that 𝐒𝐤𝐞𝐞𝐞 knew she would fight for, in her own small way, every day of her life. As the first rays of the sun began to peek over the horizon, 𝐒𝐤𝐞𝐞𝐞 stirred from her slumber, ready to face another day in the unforgiving world of ancient Egypt. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that there would be moments of despair and hopelessness. But she also knew that she was not alone, that she was part of a sisterhood that stretched back through the ages, a bond that could never be broken. And so, with a heart full of courage and determination, 𝐒𝐤𝐞𝐞𝐞 stepped out into the dawning light, ready to take on whatever challenges the day might bring. For she was a woman of Egypt, and though her life might be hard, her spirit was unbreakable. In a world that sought to crush her beneath the weight of tradition and oppression, she would find a way to rise, to claim her place in the tapestry of history, one small victory at a time. As the scorching desert winds swirled around the mighty Sphinx, stirring up eddies of golden sand, one could almost hear the echoes of women's voices drifting across the centuries. Mothers and daughters, queens and commoners, priestesses and physicians, all bound together by the shared experience of womanhood in this complex and often unforgiving land. For you see, while Egypt is renowned for its majestic monuments and staggering feats of engineering that have endured for millennia, the lives of its women were often as fleeting and fragile as the lotus blossoms that grace the tranquil pools of the pharaoh's gardens. To be a woman in ancient Egypt was to walk a tightrope between revered symbol and oppressed subject, where one's worth was measured not by her own accomplishments, but by her relation to the men who ruled over her. From birth to death, an Egyptian woman's life was a tapestry woven with the threads of subjugation, her fate determined by the whims of fathers, husbands, and sons. Girlhood was but a brief prelude to the heavy responsibilities of adulthood, with most girls married off by the tender age of 12 to men often twice their age. Childhood was a luxury few could afford, as young girls were quickly thrust into the roles of wife and mother, their days consumed by the endless cycle of domestic chores and childbearing. For women in ancient Egypt, the spectre of death loomed large over the joys and trials of motherhood. With little understanding of the intricacies of the female body and rudimentary medical knowledge, childbirth was a perilous endeavor that claimed the lives of countless women. It is estimated that as many as 1 in 3 women perished in the throes of labor, their lives cut short by the very act of bringing new life into the world. Even for those who survived the ordeal of childbirth, the hardships of motherhood were far from over. with an average life expectancy of just 30 years. Most women would bear numerous children in their short lifetimes, their bodies worn down by the constant strain of pregnancy and nursing. The pressure to produce heirs, especially sons, was immense, and a woman's value was often measured by her fertility. But amidst the struggles and sacrifices of motherhood, there were moments of joy and tenderness that illuminated the lives of Egyptian women, like rays of sunlight piercing through the clouds. The bond between mother and child was cherished and celebrated in art and literature, with goddesses like Isis revered as the ultimate embodiment of maternal love and devotion. One such mother who left an indelible mark on the annals of Egyptian history was Queen Tia, the beloved wife of Pharaoh Amenhotep III and mother of the infamous Akhenaten. Born a commoner, Tia rose to become one of the most influential women of her time, wielding considerable power and influence in the royal court. Her legacy endures in the many monuments and inscriptions that bear her name, testament to the high esteem in which she was held by her husband and son. But even a queen as mighty as Tia was not immune to the heartache and loss that plagued the lives of all Egyptian mothers. Of the 6 children she bore, only 2, Akhenaten and his sister Setamun, survived to adulthood. The others, including the Crown Prince Thutmose, were claimed by the cruel hand of fate, leaving Tia to bear the burden of grief that was all too familiar to the women of her time. As the years passed and a woman's childbearing days came to an end, she would enter the twilight of her life, her status and security dependent on the children she had borne and raised. If she was fortunate enough to have outlived her husband, she would rely on her sons to provide for her in her old age, her days spent in quiet reflection and the company of her grandchildren. But for the many widows who had no sons to support them, old age could be a time of great hardship and vulnerability. With no means of their own and little recourse under the law, these women were often left to fend for themselves, their fate uncertain in a society that placed little value on the lives of its elders. It is against this backdrop of struggle and resilience that the story of Nefertiti, one of the most famous and enigmatic women of ancient Egypt, takes on a new and poignant meaning. Born into a noble family, Nefertiti rose to become the chief wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, her beauty and grace immortalized in the many statues and reliefs that bear her likeness. But beneath the surface of her serene and regal exterior, Nefertiti's life was marked by the same trials and tribulations that befell all Egyptian women. Like so many of her contemporaries, she was married at a young age to a man she barely knew, her destiny entwined with that of a pharaoh who would go on to upend the very foundations of Egyptian society. As Akhenaten embarked on his radical religious reforms, elevating the worship of the sun god Aten above all others, Nefertiti found herself at the center of a cultural and spiritual revolution that would shake the very core of Egyptian identity. She stood by her husband's side as he built a new capital city, Amarna, dedicated to the glory of the Aten, her own image forever linked with that of the heretic king. But even as she basked in the glow of her husband's favor and the adoration of her subjects, Nefertiti's life was not without its sorrows and hardships. Like so many women of her time, she endured the pain of losing children, with several of her daughters dying in infancy or childhood. And when Akhenaten himself passed away, leaving his young son Tutankhamun to inherit the throne, Nefertiti's fate became uncertain. Some scholars believe that she may have ruled briefly as pharaoh herself, taking on the mantle of leadership in a time of great upheaval and transition. Others suggest that she may have been cast aside, her influence and power waning in the face of shifting political winds. Whatever the truth may be, Nefertiti's story serves as a poignant reminder of the precarious position that even the most powerful and influential women occupied in ancient Egyptian society. For all her beauty and grace, for all her regal bearing and commanding presence, Nefertiti was still, at her core, a woman, a daughter, a wife, a mother, subject to the same fears, sorrows, and uncertainties that plagued the lives of all Egyptian women. Her story, like that of so many others, is one of resilience and strength in the face of adversity, of the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome even the most daunting of obstacles. As we ponder the lives of these ancient women, separated from us by the vast expanse of time and culture, we cannot help but feel a sense of kinship and connection to their struggles and triumphs. For though the world has changed in countless ways since the days of the pharaohs, the essence of what it means to be a woman, to love, to nurture, to endure, remains as timeless and universal as the sands of the desert itself. In the end, the legacy of ancient Egyptian women is one of quiet strength and resilience, of the ability to find moments of joy and meaning in even the harshest of circumstances. It is a legacy that echoes down through the ages, whispering to us from across the centuries, reminding us of the indomitable spirit that lies at the heart of every woman's soul. So let us pause for a moment in the stillness of the night to honor the memory of these ancient sisters, the mothers and daughters, the queens and commoners, the priestesses and physicians, who lived and loved and struggled and triumphed in a world so different from our own, yet so achingly familiar in its human complexities. Let us remember their names, their faces, their stories, not as distant figures of myth and legend, but as flesh and blood women who lived and breathed and left their mark upon the world. And as we drift off into the welcoming embrace of sleep, let us carry with us the wisdom and strength of these ancient women, their spirits forever woven into the fabric of our own lives, guiding us through the challenges and triumphs that lie ahead. For in the end, we are all daughters of Egypt, bound together by the timeless threads of womanhood that stretch across the ages, connecting us to the past, the present, and the future, in an unbroken chain of resilience, hope, and love. Wise pharaohs valued their counsel, and some, like Nefertiti, held sway over matters of state alongside their husbands. But even a queen of Egypt walked a precarious path. Her influence relied on remaining in the fickle pharaoh's good graces. Should she fall out of favor or fail to produce an heir, she could be cast aside, her status and security vanishing like a mirage in the desert. The tale of Queen Tyre illustrates the heights a royal woman could reach, but also the limits she faced. As the great royal wife of Amenhotep III, Tyre was one of the most powerful women of her time. Her husband so adored her that he built her a lavish palace and erected monuments in her honor. Tyre's name appeared alongside Amenhotep's in official decrees, and she corresponded with foreign rulers, a rare privilege for a queen. Yet for all her influence, Tyre was still beholden to her spouse. When Amenhotep III died after a 38-year reign, she found her sway much diminished. Her son, the eccentric Akhenaten, supplanted her and embarked on a religious revolution that upended centuries of tradition. He moved the capital to a remote desert site and devoted himself to the worship of Aten, the sun disk, spurning the old gods. His queen Nefertiti joined him in this grand experiment. Tyre seemingly had little choice but to quietly endure these upheavals in her twilight years. For even a queen as formidable as she could not openly defy the new pharaoh. The patriarchal system constrained her agency. It's telling that Tyre, this shrewd stateswoman who helped rule Egypt at the peak of its power, is best remembered today simply as a king's wife and king's mother. Her own legacy is overshadowed by the men she supported. Such was the plight of even the most elite women in ancient Egypt. A gilded cage is still a cage. Queens may have resided in palaces dripping with Nubian gold and dined on delicacies from across the empire. But they knew their status could be stripped at any time based on the whims of men. They poured their energies into advancing the prospects of their sons, knowing their own security in old age depended on having a male heir reach the throne. Only a handful of women managed to rule Egypt in their own right as female kings. The most famous, Hatshepsut, seized power after the death of her husband Thutmose II in the 15th century BCE. Although intended only as regent for her young stepson, Hatshepsut declared herself pharaoh and reigned for over 2 decades during the prosperous 18th dynasty. As pharaoh, Hatshepsut adopted all the trappings of male kingship. She wore the crown and ceremonial beard and referred to herself with male pronouns. She launched ambitious building projects and lucrative trade expeditions. By all accounts, she ruled effectively, bringing wealth and stability to Egypt. Yet her story also reveals the precariousness of female power. Late in Hatshepsut's reign, her stepson Thutmose III came of age and was named co-ruler. Evidence suggests a power struggle between them. After her death, Thutmose III systematically chiseled Hatshepsut's name off monuments and relegated her to obscurity, possibly to legitimize his own rule. While he grudgingly left her funerary temple standing, he literally tried to erase her legacy as pharaoh. For nearly all of ancient Egyptian history, the throne passed from father to son. The kingship was a male role, its duties entwined with masculine attributes. Hatshepsut ruled successfully by styling herself in the image of a male king. She was the exception that proved the rule. Women were not considered fit to govern on their own. The warrior queens of ancient Egypt faced similar challenges. Ahotep I, wife of the pharaoh Seqenenre Tao II, took decisive action to defend her country against the invading Hyksos in the 16th century BCE. After her husband was slain in battle, Ahotep may have served as regent and rallied the nation at a time of crisis. She was honored with the title King's Mother for ensuring the kingship passed to her sons. A stela praises Ahotep as one who cares for Egypt. She looked after her soldiers, she guarded her, she brought back her fugitives and collected together her deserters. She pacified Upper Egypt and expelled her rebels. This inscription suggests she even led armies into battle, a remarkable feat for a woman of her time. Yet Ahotep's heroic deeds were in service of putting her male offspring Kamose and Ahmose on the throne. She held power temporarily as an interim leader until proper male rule could be restored. The ultimate goal was to uphold the patrilineal succession, not establish female leadership in its own right. Even the female rulers most successful at harnessing power still had to navigate the confines of a male-dominated system. Nefertiti, the iconic queen who ruled alongside her husband Akhenaten in the mid-14th century BCE, is celebrated for her beauty and influence. But her authority derived from her wifely status, not an independent queenship. As the principal wife of Akhenaten, Nefertiti played a prominent role in the Amarna period religious reforms that elevated the god Aten above all others. She was depicted worshipping alongside her husband in novel artwork that emphasized the royal couple as intercessors with the divine. Some images even show Nefertiti in the conventional poses of a male pharaoh, smiting enemies or making offerings to the gods. However, Nefertiti disappears from the historical record in the later years of Akhenaten's reign, possibly due to falling out of favor or dying prematurely. Her ultimate fate is unknown. Despite her high status, she relied on her husband's beneficence and may have been discarded when she was no longer useful to him. After Akhenaten's death, his son Tutankhamun, born Tutankhaten, reversed the Amarna reforms and restored the traditional religious order under the guidance of influential advisors. He moved the capital back to Thebes and reinstated the powerful Amun priesthood his father had alienated. It's notable that Nefertiti did not rule as regent for her stepson, as other royal women had done. Her power was so intertwined with Akhenaten's that it could not survive him. The royal women who did wield direct power often had to grapple with the dangerous intrigues of court politics. Queen 𝐤𝐻𝐿, the last ruler of the 19th dynasty, was a rare female who ruled independently as pharaoh in the late 12th century BCE. She first served as regent for the child king 𝐼𝐴, but took the throne in her own right after his early death. As a woman ruling alone, 𝐤𝐻𝐿 faced threats to her legitimacy from rival factions and would-be successors. She had to constantly shore up her authority and justify her rule. Significantly, 𝐤𝐻𝐿 adopted the full titulary of a male pharaoh and portrayed herself as a traditional king, fulfilling religious and military roles. Despite her efforts, 𝐤𝐻𝐿's reign only lasted a few years before she was deposed by her male rival, 𝐸𝐡𝐚𝐧𝐿, founder of the 20th dynasty. Her monuments were usurped and her name largely erased from history, another stark example of female power being deliberately obliterated by a male successor. These select stories of prominent royal women hint at the rigid gender hierarchy that permeated all levels of ancient Egyptian society. Women's identities were inextricably tied to their roles as mothers and wives, not merited by their own abilities or attributes. The few who managed to attain leadership had to adopt masculine roles and work within a system stacked against them. But what of the bulk of ordinary women who labored at much lower stations in life? The wives of farmers, tradesmen, and servants. The picture that emerges is in many ways bleaker, their lot characterized by poverty, drudgery, and all too often, tragedy. Although the details of their daily lives have largely been lost to history, we can deduce much from ancient laws, medical texts, and archaeological finds. Take marriage, the social institution that defined most Egyptian women's lives. In a society without a robust social safety net, having a husband was essential for a woman's economic survival. For the father of the bride, arranging a match with a husband who could provide for his daughter was a foremost concern. The dowry given to the new couple also helped ensure the woman would be looked after. Ordinary women typically married around age 12 to 14, when they were viewed as ready for childbearing. Their husbands could be significantly older, already established in their work. Marriages were not so much romantic partnerships as practical arrangements. The husband was expected to support and protect his wife, while she was obligated to bear children and run the household. Since no organized religion held sway and there was no official registry of marriages, matrimony was essentially a private contract between families. The terms could be negotiated to allow for divorce, initiated by either party. But in practice, the system favored men who held more financial and social clout. If a marriage failed, the woman was usually the one to lose her home and purpose. For a woman to initiate divorce, she needed strong justification such as abuse, adultery, or lack of financial support, and the backing of male relatives who would take her in. A man could divorce his wife far more easily, sometimes on a mere whim. The most a woman could generally hope for was the return of her dowry so she could remarry or live independently. This imbalance put immense pressure on women to be attractive, deferential spouses who upheld domestic harmony at all costs. The stakes were high in a world where a failed marriage could consign a woman to destitution. Many must have endured unhappy unions simply to preserve their precarious position. With marriage came the expectation of many pregnancies to ensure the survival of at least some offspring into adulthood. Childbirth was extremely perilous in an era before modern medicine. By some estimates, as many as 1 in 3 women ultimately died from complications related to pregnancy and delivery. The cemeteries of ancient Egypt hold the remains of countless young mothers. Surviving childbirth was no guarantee of longevity. The average life expectancy was around 35 years, though some lived into their 60s or 70s if they were particularly fortunate. Women who outlived their husbands had to hope their grown children, especially sons, would support them. the elderly childless risked being reduced to begging. Households were multi-generational, with grandparents, parents, and children residing together. Younger women did the bulk of strenuous housework, grinding grain, baking bread, brewing beer, spinning flax into linen, tending the hearth. Archaeologists have found skeletal evidence of the toll this repetitive labor took on their bodies. In poorer homes, cramped living conditions, lack of sanitation, and contaminated food and water meant illness was rife. Parasitic diseases like schistosomiasis and malaria afflicted the populace, along with bacterial infections. Although Egyptian physicians developed some sophisticated medical techniques, their understanding was still limited, and many of their cures were ineffective. Women were all but barred from gaining an education or entering the elite professions of scribe, priest, or government official. When boys reached adolescence, they would go off to learn a trade, while girls stayed home to be molded into good wives under their mother's tutelage. The female realm was a small, circumscribed one, passed down the generations. Although some women worked outside the home in jobs like maidservant, nursemaid, dancer, or musician, they labored at the fringes of society. There is scant evidence of women working as the artisans and craftsmen who were the backbone of the Egyptian economy. The sculptors, carpenters, potters, metalsmiths, and jewelers producing the great civilization's material culture. One of the few ways for a woman to gain status was as a priestess, participating in the rituals of the temple cults. Yet this role too was subordinate to the male priests who presided over the most sacred rites. The most prominent female religious title was God's Wife of Amun, granted to select royal women who acted as ceremonial brides of the deity. Even in death, the gulf between the sexes remained stark. The mummification and burial practices that evolved to ensure a smooth passage to the afterlife were focused on the needs of men. The lavish provisions and spells inscribed on tomb walls emphasized the male occupant's identity and accomplishments. Wives were often depicted as passive companions. The great Egyptologist Zahi Hawass estimates that only roughly a third of the mummies discovered from ancient Egypt are female. It seems that even in the quest for eternal life, women were an afterthought. Those who were mummified were often interred in the tombs of their husbands, their own identities subsumed. From cradle to grave, ancient Egyptian women faced a harsh reality. Their lives were defined by their relationships to men, fathers, husbands, brothers, sons. They were prized as mothers and homemakers, but shut out from public life. The few who achieved power did so by emulating masculine roles that were otherwise off limits. Yet it would be a disservice to define ancient Egyptian women solely by their oppression. Within the confines of their prescribed roles, many found ways to make their mark and carve meaning into difficult circumstances. They raised children, tended homes and businesses, served in temples, and upheld the social order. Some lived with grace, dignity, and even influence. Take the example of 𝐶𝐤, a woman who lived during the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom, over 4,500 years ago. She bore the impressive title Overseer of Healers, indicating she was a physician in an era when medicine was a respected art. As the administrator of a medical school, she helped train other practitioners in the healing arts. 𝐶𝐤 was also styled as a king's acquaintance, suggesting she was known to the ruler, perhaps even serving the royal household. For a woman to reach such a high station in a field like medicine was vanishingly rare. She must have been exceptionally capable to overcome the barriers to female education and professional advancement. Then there is Nonakt, a female worker from the artisan village of Deir el-Medina, who lived during the 20th dynasty of the New Kingdom, over 3,000 years ago. Her last will and testament has survived on papyrus, giving us a remarkable window into her life and personality. As a widow, Nonakt took charge of distributing her own property. In her will, Nonakt leaves the bulk of her estate to 3 of her 8 children, who supported her in old age, showing a practical streak. She also frees several of her servants, demonstrating a degree of wealth and authority. That a woman of relatively modest means could own property and have agency to bequeath it as she chose reveals women had some limited financial autonomy. The will hints at family drama, with 𝐼𝐻𝐿 chiding some of her children who have not paid attention to me during my lifetime. Far from a passive figure, she comes across as a formidable matriarch, well aware of her own mind and interests. One gets the sense 𝐼𝐻𝐿 would not let herself be pushed around. These fleeting glimpses of individual women who asserted themselves within an oppressive system are a reminder not to view the women of ancient Egypt as a monolithic group. They had hopes and dreams, quirks and foibles. They loved their children fiercely and likely took pride in their accomplishments, however unsung. We can recognize the injustice of the world into which they were born while still appreciating their humanity. Their lives were a mosaic of small triumphs and private tragedies, of difficult circumstances faced with fortitude. In their struggles, setbacks and sacrifices, there is a poignant universality that echoes across the ages. So when we picture the woman in ancient Egypt, we should see her in her complexity. Laboring in the fields, her skin bronzed by the sun. Presenting offerings to household gods, her heart full of unspoken prayers. Bartering in the market, keenly aware of her family's needs. Holding her child close, knowing each day is precious. Lifting her eyes to the distant horizon, wondering what lies beyond. Hers was a life constrained, but not without meaning. A life unrecorded in the grand monuments, but woven into the very fabric of her civilization. A life like countless others, then and now, in which the personal and the political are inextricably intertwined. To trace the history of ancient Egyptian women is to map the contours of human resilience in the face of adversity. It is to be reminded that progress is not inevitable, but hard-won. That gender equality is not a modern invention, but an eternal aspiration. That women's voices, long silenced, have always yearned to be heard. In studying their lives, we honor their memory and bring their stories into the light. We acknowledge that women are not footnotes in history, but essential threads in the tapestry of our shared experience. For only by reckoning with the past in all its complexity can we hope to weave a more just and equitable future. The women of ancient Egypt call to us across the millennia, their whispers echoing through the halls of time. Let us listen to their tales of toil and triumph, of love and loss. Let us remember them not as passive victims, but as active agents navigating an imperfect world. Let us carry their legacy forward, so that no woman's story is ever lost to the shifting sands. In their honor, let us work towards a world where every woman can live with dignity, autonomy, and opportunity. A world where daughters are valued as much as sons, where wives are true partners rather than property. A world that would be unrecognizable to our ancient sisters, but one they surely dreamed of as they 𝐼𝐻𝐿. Let's journey back now to the banks of the Nile, where the cycles of flooding brought both abundance and destruction. Each year, the great river would swell and burst its banks, blanketing the surrounding fields in a thick layer of rich, black silt. For a few precious months, the land would spring to life. Lush greenery sprouting from the earth, heavy grains ripening under the scorching sun. The very heartbeat of Egypt depended on this delicate dance with the Nile. And no one understood that precarious balance better than the kingdom's farmers, many of whom were women. While it's true that agriculture was seen as men's work, the reality is that women toiled alongside their husbands, brothers, and sons in the fields. During planting and harvest seasons especially, it was all hands on deck. Women sowed seeds, hauled water, threshed grain, and ground flour from dawn until dusk, their lean bodies glistening with sweat. With so many able-bodied men conscripted into the army or laboring on Pharaoh's monumental building projects, managing the crops increasingly fell to the women left behind. On larger estates, noblewomen might oversee the logistical symphony of planting schedules, irrigation efforts, and produce storage. But the backbreaking labor was always left to peasant women. A woman's value was measured in how many baskets she could fill, how many hours she could work under the unrelenting Egyptian sun. One of these women was 𝐶𝐚𝐬𝐻, a farmer's wife from the village of Deir el-Medina. Day after day, 𝐶𝐚𝐬𝐻 would rise before the sun, wrapping her sleeping children in cool linen before venturing out into the fields. With a hoe balanced on her shoulder and a baby strapped to her back, she'd spend hours bent double, coaxing stubborn seedlings from the earth. As the crops grew high around her and the harvest approached, 𝐶𝐚𝐬𝐻's anticipation mingled with dread. A good yield meant food on the table, goods to barter, and offerings to placate Renenutet, the cobra-headed goddess of the harvest. But bringing in the grain was a race against time, a Herculean task that consumed every moment from first light to last. Through it all, 𝐶𝐚𝐬𝐻 found small joys where she could, in the scent of freshly turned earth, the satisfying ache of tired muscles at day's end, the giggles of her little ones chasing each other through the rows of wheat stalks. Tending the land was bone-wearying work, but it was also a reminder of her quiet strength, her endurance in the face of unimaginable adversity. For women like 𝐶𝐚𝐻, being a farmer was not a choice, but a necessity, a means of survival in a world where their worth was so often undervalued. They poured their blood, sweat and tears into the unyielding Egyptian soil, knowing all the while that the fruits of their labors would likely be enjoyed by others. The pharaoh, the priests, the landowners. They were the ones who reaped the benefits of the women's ceaseless toil. And yet, season after season, harvest after harvest, the women persevered. They rose with the sun and worked until their hands were raw and their backs ached. They birthed babies in the fields and nursed them as they picked flax. They mourned the loss of daughters, married off too soon, and sons sent off to fight in distant lands. Through it all, they endured, because they had to, because their families depended on them. Because in a society that so often dismissed their contributions, tending the land was a way to carve out some small measure of autonomy, of purpose. So the next time you imagine the lush fields and bountiful harvests of ancient Egypt, spare a thought for the women like 𝐶𝐚𝐻 who made it all possible. The ones who rose before dawn and worked until dusk, their babies bouncing on their backs and their hands rough with calluses. The ones whose stories have been largely lost to history, but whose legacy endures in the very soil of the Nile Delta. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to flicker in the darkening sky, 𝐶𝐚𝐻 would gather her little ones close and whisper stories of Osiris and Isis, of the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. She knew that her own life was just a small piece in a vast, unknowable tapestry, but she also knew that her hard work and sacrifices were weaving something beautiful, something enduring. In the face of unrelenting hardship, 𝐶𝐚𝐻 and countless women like her found ways to create meaning, to carve out spaces of joy and resilience. They may have been relegated to the margins of history, but their quiet strength and indomitable spirits echo through the ages. The story of ancient Egyptian women is one of struggle and subjugation, yes, but it is also one of profound courage, resilience, and grace under pressure. These women bore the weight of their society on their shoulders, and they did so with a fortitude that deserves our deepest respect and admiration. So let us remember them, these unsung heroes of the Nile. Let us honor their sacrifices and celebrate their triumphs, however small. And let us strive to create a world where no woman must toil in obscurity, where every contribution is valued and every voice is heard. As we drift off to sleep tonight, let us dream of a different kind of Egypt, one where women like Senetmut are not just the backbone of society, but its beating heart. One where they are free to pursue their own paths, to shape their own destinies. And one where their stories are not lost to the sands of time, but are woven into the very fabric of history, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit in the face of even the most daunting odds. The wigs favored by wealthy Egyptian women were hot and heavy, made from human hair woven together with plant fibers and wool. For the elite, these wigs were adorned with gold ornaments, jeweled pins, and intricate braiding. While stunning to behold, they were cumbersome to wear, trapping heat against the scalp and straining the neck with their weight. Imagine the wife of a high-ranking scribe preparing for a banquet at the palace of the pharaoh. Her servants spend hours dressing her wig, weaving in strands of gold and fastening beads of lapis lazuli. The final creation towers above her head, a symbol of her status and beauty. But as the evening wears on, the heavy wig begins to take its toll. Sweat beads on her brow and trickles down her neck, dampening the fine linen of her gown. By the end of the night, her head throbs and her neck aches from the burden of her own beauty. For royal women, the expectations were even higher. They were meant to embody the ideal of feminine perfection, their images carved into stone and painted on the walls of temples. Perhaps no queen played this role as skillfully as Cleopatra VII, the last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Born in 69 BC, Cleopatra was not Egyptian by birth, but a descendant of the Greek Macedonian Ptolemy line. She embraced Egyptian culture, learning the language and adopting the customs. But her true power lay in her mastery of self-presentation. Cleopatra crafted an image of herself as a living goddess, a sensual embodiment of Isis and Aphrodite. She adorned herself in golden robes and jewels, painting her face in the dramatic coal and green malachite of the Egyptian style. When she first met Julius Caesar, Cleopatra was said to have been smuggled into his chambers rolled up in a carpet. She emerged like a gift from the gods, dazzling the Roman general with her beauty and wit. Cleopatra bore Caesar a son, Caesarion, solidifying her alliance with Rome. After Caesar's assassination, she charmed his successor, Mark Antony, hosting him for lavish banquets and decadent nights upon her perfumed barge. But beneath the intoxicating surface, Cleopatra's power was precarious. She ruled at the whims of fickle Roman politics, always one misstep away from ruin. In the end, as Octavian's forces closed in, she chose to take her own life, rather than be paraded through Rome as a captive. The asp, that potent Egyptian symbol, was said to have delivered her fatal bite. Cleopatra's story embodies the paradox of the Egyptian woman, at once powerful and powerless, deified and subjugated. For even a queen who seemed to have it all was, in the end, still a pawn in the games of men. While women like Cleopatra dazzled on the world stage, the spiritual lives of most Egyptian women were focused on the domestic sphere. The ancient Egyptians worshipped a vast pantheon of gods and goddesses, each with their own sphere of influence. For women, the most important deities were those associated with fertility, childbirth, and the home. Taweret, the hippo-headed goddess of childbirth, was invoked by women to protect them through the dangers of labor and delivery. Statuettes of Taweret were placed in homes, her fearsome visage meant to scare away the demons that threatened mother and child. Bes, the dwarf god with the lion's mane, also guarded the household, his bawdy humor and raucous dancing warding off evil spirits. Hathor, the cow-headed goddess of love, beauty, and motherhood, was among the most widely worshipped by Egyptian women. She was the patron of music, dance, and drunkenness, her festivals occasions for wild revelry. Women would shake sistra, rattles made of bronze and faience, to summon Hathor's intoxicating spirit. In myth, Hathor was the consort of Horus, the divine son who avenged his father Osiris. Together, they embodied the cycle of death and rebirth that was central to Egyptian spirituality. But while goddesses like Hathor and Isis loomed large in myth and temple, in the real world of ancient Egypt, women were largely excluded from positions of religious authority. The priesthood was overwhelmingly male, with women serving only in secondary roles as musicians, dancers, and attendants. There were a few exceptions, such as the gods' wives of Amun, a lineage of royal women who held a semi-autonomous position at the Temple of Karnak. But for the most part, women's spiritual lives were confined to the household altars, where they prayed for fertility and protection. One woman who broke through these barriers was Iset, a chantress of the god Amun, who lived during the 20th dynasty around 1150 BC. Iset's story is known to us through her elaborately decorated tomb in the Valley of the Kings, a rare honor for a woman of non-royal birth. As a chantress, Iset would have sung and played music in the temples of Amun, participating in the daily rituals that sustained the god. Her tomb paintings depict her shaking a sistrum before offerings, her face alive with devotion. Iset's husband, Ramose, was a scribe in the temple, and together they seem to have formed a spiritually attuned partnership. But even for a woman of Iset's stature, true religious equality remained out of reach. Her role as chantress, while respected, was still seen as subordinate to the male priests. And her very presence in the Valley of the Kings, that most sacred of burial grounds, was an anomaly. For most women, the afterlife was a far more uncertain prospect, their mummified remains interred in simple desert graves. As the sun set over the Nile, casting long shadows across the sand, the women of ancient Egypt returned to their homes, their duties for the day complete. They lit oil lamps against the gathering dark, murmuring prayers to 𝐻 and Bes for protection through the night. In the flickering light, they might have reflected on the paradox of their lives, at once revered and restricted, celebrated and constrained. In the grand arc of history, the voices of these women are often lost, muffled beneath the bombast of kings and the clamor of war. But in the quiet moments, in the spaces between the lines of hieroglyphs, their stories can still be heard. They whisper of lives marked by hardship and resilience, of beauty and sorrow intertwined. For the women of ancient Egypt, life was a complex tapestry, woven from the threads of duty, devotion, and desire. They navigated a world that both exalted and oppressed them, their power constrained by the very roles that defined them. As wives and mothers, they were celebrated, but as individuals, they were often overlooked. And yet in the face of these challenges, Egyptian women found ways to assert their agency and leave their mark. They ruled as queens, like Hatshepsut and Cleopatra, defying convention to claim power in their own right. They served as physicians like Merit Ptah, tending to the bodies and souls of their fellow women. They channeled the divine in temples and homes, their voices rising in song to the goddesses who shaped their lives. In death, as in life, the women of Egypt sought to carve out their own destinies. They adorned their tombs with scenes of family and faith, ensuring that their stories would endure through the ages. And in doing so, they left us a legacy, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit has the power to endure and to inspire. As we look back across the millennia, it is easy to be dazzled by the grandeur of ancient Egypt, the towering pyramids, the golden treasures, the mummies preserved in silent repose. But it is in the lives of the people, the men and women who toiled and dreamed beneath the desert sun, that we find the true heart of this civilization. And in the stories of the women of Egypt, we find a testament to the enduring power of resilience and hope. For though their lives were often marked by struggle and sorrow, they found ways to create beauty and meaning in the face of adversity. They loved and laughed, dreamed and dared, even as the world sought to constrain them. In the end, perhaps this is the greatest lesson we can learn from the women of ancient Egypt, that even in the darkest of times, the light of the human spirit can still shine through. That, in the face of oppression and injustice, courage and compassion can still take root and flourish. And so, as we drift off to sleep, let us dream of these women, their faces illuminated by the glow of oil lamps, their voices rising in song to the goddesses of the Nile. Let us honor their struggles and celebrate their triumphs, and in doing so, find inspiration for our own lives. For in the end, the story of ancient Egypt is not just a story of kings and conquest, of pyramids and gold. It is a story of people, of the men and women who lived and loved, struggled and dreamed beneath the eternal sun. And in the lives of the women of Egypt, we find a powerful reminder of the resilience and strength that lies within us all. As the night deepens and the stars wheel overhead, we can imagine the spirits of these women watching over us, their wisdom echoing through the ages. And in their stories, we can find the courage to face our own challenges, to rise above the limitations that seek to define us. So let us give thanks for the women of ancient Egypt, for their courage, their compassion, and their enduring legacy. And let us carry their stories with us as we navigate the complexities of our own lives and strive to create a world where every voice is heard and every spirit is free to soar. The life of an average woman in ancient Egypt was one of toil, subservience, and all too often, tragedy. While the civilization is renowned for its splendor and achievements, the women who helped build it were frequently relegated to the shadows. From a young age, a girl's fate was not her own. Childhood was brief, as girls were considered women and married off as soon as they reached puberty, usually around the age of 12 or 13. Their husbands were often significantly older men, chosen by the girl's father to strengthen family alliances or business connections. There was little opportunity for a formal education. At most, a girl from a wealthy family might learn to read and write, but this was rare. For the vast majority, education consisted of learning the domestic skills needed to run a household: cooking, cleaning, spinning, weaving, and childcare. Once married, a woman's primary duty was to bear children, particularly sons to carry on the family name. Childbirth was extremely dangerous in an era without modern medicine. It's estimated that as many as 1 in 3 women died in childbirth or shortly thereafter from complications. Those who survived could expect to bear many children, becoming almost constantly pregnant during their most fertile years. Contraception existed, but was not reliable or widely available. A woman was expected to be an obedient, dutiful wife, always putting her husband's needs before her own. While a husband could divorce his wife fairly easily, simply by declaring it so and providing a small stipend, it was much harder for a woman to divorce her husband. She needed to prove gross mistreatment or failure to provide the basic necessities of life. Even then, divorce carried a heavy stigma for women. A divorcee would likely need to return to her father's house or depend on the charity of relatives. As a woman aged, her status declined further. With fading youth and fertility, she became even more marginalized. If she outlived her husband, as many did, she would need to depend on the support of her children, particularly any sons. But this was not guaranteed. Elderly women without male protection were among the most vulnerable members of society, at risk of poverty, homelessness, and abuse. Even women of the highest status were not immune to such hardships and heartaches. Consider Nefertiti, the famous queen renowned for her beauty. She was married to the controversial pharaoh Akhenaten, who upended Egyptian religion and culture. While Nefertiti's beauty and influence are legendary, her life was far from easy. She and Akhenaten had 6 daughters, but no surviving sons. In a bid to secure the succession, Akhenaten married 2 of his daughters, fathering future pharaoh Tutankhamun with one of them. Nefertiti disappeared from the historical record around this time, leading to speculation that she fell out of favor or even died. Despite her status, she was still subject to the whims of her husband and the pressures of producing a male heir. The life of an Egyptian woman was quite literally backbreaking labor. Cooking was time-consuming, done over open fires with heavy clay pots. Bread, the staple of the Egyptian diet, had to be baked fresh daily. This meant hours of toil grinding grain, kneading dough, and tending the fire. Water had to be hauled from the Nile for cooking, washing, and drinking. Clothes and linens were washed by hand in the river, then laid out to dry in the scorching sun. Spinning, weaving, and sewing consumed much of a woman's day. Linen, woven from flax, was the primary textile. Every stage of its production required intense manual labor, from harvesting and processing the flax plants, to spinning the fibers into thread, to weaving the thread into fabric on a loom. An average outfit could take weeks or even months to produce. Again, this burden fell almost entirely on women. Childcare was also the mother's responsibility. With an average family size of 5 or more children, this was no small task. Children were often carried on the mother's back while she worked. Older daughters would be tasked with helping care for their younger siblings. The cycle of domestic drudgery was passed down from mother to daughter, generation after generation. For all her toil, a woman had shockingly little to show for it. Any property or wealth she possessed came from her husband or father. She could not enter contracts or represent herself in legal matters without a male guardian. The fields she helped tend, the textiles she labored over, the children she bore, none of it was truly her own. In this unforgiving world, the spectre of disease and death was never far. With limited medical knowledge, even minor injuries and illnesses could be life-threatening. Infection, malnutrition, parasites, and communicable diseases ran rampant, particularly among the lower classes living in crowded, unsanitary conditions. Wealthier households had some rudimentary plumbing and sanitation, such as limestone toilet seats and copper piping. But for most, poor hygiene was an inescapable fact of life. Waste was disposed of in open pits or in the streets. The Nile, though worshipped as the giver of life, was also a source of deadly waterborne diseases. There were some advanced medical texts for the time, such as the Ebers Papyrus and the Edwin Smith Papyrus, which contained treatments for a variety of ailments. But these focused mainly on the illnesses of men, particularly wounds and bone fractures that might befall soldiers or laborers. Women's health was largely neglected, seen as mysterious and unclean. In this context, the story of Merit Ptah is all the more remarkable. She was the first recorded woman physician in history, practicing medicine in ancient Egypt around 2700 BCE. As a chief physician, Merit Ptah would have tended to the ailments of the royal court and the wealthy elite. But she also cared for women during pregnancy and childbirth, likely saving many lives with her knowledge and skill. For a woman to rise to such a position was exceedingly rare. Medicine, like most other professions, was dominated by men. The fact that Merit Ptah's accomplishments were recorded at all is testament to the respect she must have commanded in a world where women were so often overlooked. But for the vast majority of Egyptian women, life remained a struggle for survival, not achievement. The oppressive heat of the desert sun bore down on them as they hauled water, tended crops, ground grain, and wove cloth. Sweat trickled down their faces, streaking the coal and malachite that lined their eyes. Makeup was a constant in the life of an Egyptian woman, a mask she was expected to wear. The pressure to conform to idealized standards of beauty was immense. Cosmetics were seen as essential not just for aesthetics, but for spirituality and even health. A bare face was considered slovenly, uncouth. Eyebrows were heavily lined, elongated, and extended to the temples in a dramatic almond shape. Kohl, a black powder made from ground minerals, was liberally applied around the eyes. Green malachite shadow was also popular. Cheeks and lips were reddened with ochre blush and pigments. Pale yellow skin was the ideal, achieved through the application of powders and creams. This mask of perfection was not just for the living. Even in death, women were expected to maintain the illusion of ageless beauty. Mummies of wealthy women were adorned with extravagant gold jewelry, fine linen wrappings, and lifelike painted-on makeup. Wigs were another crucial element of the Egyptian woman's beauty regimen. Both men and women shaved their heads for coolness and cleanliness, then donned elaborate wigs made from human and horsehair. These could be heavy and hot, and added discomfort in the already sweltering climate. But to appear in public with a naked scalp was unthinkable for a woman of any standing. So she endured the weight and itch of the wig, the heat of the desert trapped against her bare skin beneath it. Clothing, too, presented a challenge. While Egyptian fashion is often depicted as elegantly draped white linen, the reality was far less glamorous. Linen, while light and cool, was not easy to keep clean in a world of dust, sweat, and manual labor. The diaphanous garments we associate with Egyptian women were the purview of the elite, not the average woman toiling in the fields or hunched over a loom. For most, clothing was simple, minimal, and functional. A rectangular length of linen wrapped and tied around the body, often leaving the breasts exposed. While this might seem liberating compared to the restrictive corsets and petticoats of later eras, it offered little in the way of true comfort or practicality. The thin fabric provided scant protection against the elements or the hazards of daily work. The pressure to maintain an attractive appearance was constant, even as the realities of life made it nearly impossible. A woman was expected to be perpetually youthful, beautiful, and sexually desirable, no matter her age or circumstance. The use of beauty aids was not a choice, but a mandate. To neglect one's appearance was to invite scorn, ridicule, and even accusations of moral failing. This was true even for women of the highest station, like the legendary Cleopatra VII. Born into the Ptolemaic dynasty, Cleopatra was not ethnically Egyptian. She was of Greek descent, the daughter of Pharaoh Ptolemy XII. But she embraced Egyptian culture and religion, styling herself as the embodiment of the goddess Isis. Cleopatra's beauty and allure are the stuff of legends, immortalized in countless works of art and literature. But her physical appearance was only one facet of her power. She was a brilliant strategist, a clever negotiator, a charismatic leader. She spoke multiple languages, including the Egyptian tongue, a rarity for Ptolemaic rulers. Yet even Cleopatra could not escape the limitations and expectations placed on women. Her story is often reduced to her sexuality, her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Her intellect, her ambition, her political acumen are overshadowed by the men in her life and the manner of her death. In the end, Cleopatra chose to take her own life rather than be paraded as a captive through the streets of Rome. Even in death, she stage-managed her own image, clinging to the illusion of eternal beauty as the asp's venom coursed through her veins. For women in ancient Egypt, religion offered some small measure of comfort and influence. The pantheon was populated by powerful goddesses like Isis, Hathor, and Sekhmet. Isis, in particular, was revered as the ideal mother and wife, the protector of the dead. Her cult spread far beyond Egypt's borders, finding adherents across the Mediterranean world. Some women found a degree of agency through religious service. The role of chantress, or singer, was one of the few positions of authority open to women. These priestesses performed music and dance in temples, participated in festivals and ceremonies. But even this was a pale shadow of the power and prestige granted to male priests. Women were excluded from the highest echelons of religious leadership. They could not perform the most sacred rituals or enter the holiest sanctuaries. Their service was always subordinate, their influence circumscribed. The stories of these chantresses provide a glimpse into the lives of extraordinary women, operating within oppressive constraints. One such woman was 𝐒𝐥𝐞𝐞𝐞, chantress of Amun during the 20th dynasty. 𝐒𝐥𝐞𝐞 came from a long line of powerful priests, and her father was the high priest of Amun, one of the most influential men in Egypt. As a chantress, 𝐒𝐥𝐞𝐞 would have sung and performed sacred music in the temples of Thebes. She would have participated in festivals and processions, perhaps even in the great festival of Opet, when the statues of the gods were carried from the temple of Karnak to Luxor. But despite her pedigree and her position, 𝐒𝐥𝐞𝐞 had little real power. She could not inherit her father's role or wield his influence. When he died, the high priesthood passed to a male successor, while 𝐒𝐥𝐞𝐞 remained in her subordinate role. Still, her story suggests that some women found ways to carve out a measure of agency and influence within the confines of their prescribed roles. 𝐒𝐥𝐞𝐞 may not have had the same authority as her father, but she likely commanded a degree of respect and status through her religious service. For royal women, the path to power was even narrower and more perilous. The great royal wife, usually the chief consort of the pharaoh, held a lofty but precarious position. Her status and influence were entirely dependent on her relationship to the king. Some queens, like Ahmose Nefertari and Tiye, wielded significant influence as the mothers of pharaohs. They were honored with their own temples and monuments, their names inscribed alongside their sons. But their power was always an extension of male authority, never truly their own. A few extraordinary women, like Hatshepsut and Cleopatra, managed to rule as pharaohs in their own right. But they were the exceptions that proved the rule, and even they faced tremendous opposition and challenges. Hatshepsut, who ruled in the 15th century BCE, was one of the most successful pharaohs of the New Kingdom. She came to power after the death of her husband, Thutmose II, serving as regent for her young stepson. But rather than stepping aside when he came of age, Hatshepsut took on the full powers and titles of a pharaoh herself. For over 20 years, she ruled Egypt, building grand temples and monuments, expanding trade, and leading military campaigns. But to legitimize her rule, Hatshepsut had to style herself as a man, depicted in statues and reliefs with a false beard and male clothing. Her successor and stepson, Thutmose III, would later attempt to erase her from history, chiseling her name from monuments and defacing her images. Even in death, a woman who dared to grasp the reins of power was subject to the posthumous wrath and resentment of the men around her. The life of a royal woman, for all its luxury and privilege, was still a gilded cage. She was a pawn in the game of dynastic politics, her value tied to her fertility and her family connections. At any moment, she could fall from favor, be supplanted by a rival, or even face exile or execution. The story of Nefertari, wife of Ramses II, is a poignant example. Though she was the most beloved of Ramses's wives, honored with a magnificent tomb in the Valley of the Queens, her power was always tenuous. When she failed to produce a male heir, she was quickly overshadowed by a secondary wife, 𝐒𝐥𝐞𝐞, who bore Ramses's successor, Merneptah. For all the glory and grandeur of ancient Egypt, the life of a woman was one of constant uncertainty and fear. No matter her status or accomplishments, she was always at the mercy of the men who controlled her destiny. As the sun set over the Nile, casting long shadows across the land, the women of Egypt returned to their homes, their bodies aching from the day's labors. They ground the grain, mended the clothes, tended the children, just as their mothers and grandmothers had done before them. But as they lay down to sleep on their simple reed mats, perhaps they allowed themselves a moment to dream of a different life. A life where they were not property, not chattel, not beasts of burden. A life where they were free to learn, to create, to explore, to love. A life where they were the mistresses of their own destinies. These dreams, like so much else in the lives of ancient Egyptian women, were fleeting, ephemeral. For most, they dissipated with the rising of the sun, vanishing like mist over the Nile. The cycle of toil and subservience began anew, an inescapable fate etched in stone like the names of the pharaohs who ruled over them. But in the whispered stories passed down from mother to daughter, in the sacred songs of the priestesses, in the defiant gaze of a queen who dared to rule as king, the spark of hope endured. Across the centuries, it kindles still, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the resilient spirit of women could not be extinguished. The sands of Egypt have long since shifted, the once mighty monuments worn smooth by the passage of time. But the stories of the women who lived and died on the banks of the Nile echo still, a testament to their strength, their suffering, and their indomitable will to survive in a world that sought to grind them into dust. As we look back on this ancient civilization, it is easy to be awed by its towering pyramids, its golden treasures, its cryptic hieroglyphs. But let us not forget the silent multitudes who toiled in the shadow of those monuments. Let us remember the women who bore the brunt of the desert sun, who hauled the water and harvested the grain, who brought forth life in blood and agony. Their names may be lost to history, their faces faded from memory, but their legacy endures in the very fabric of the land they tended, in the timeless flow of the river that sustained them. They were the beating heart of Egypt, the unsung heroines of an empire built on their backs. And though the world into which they were born was a brutal one, a world that sought to break them, to crush their spirits and their dreams, still they persevered. In the face of unimaginable hardship, they found ways to carve out small spaces of agency and meaning. They tended the hearths and the shrines. They wove the threads of community and tradition. They passed down the stories and the wisdom of generations. Theirs was a quiet kin. As the scorching sun beat down upon the bustling streets of Thebes, a young woman named 𝐒𝐴𝐻 hurried towards the towering pylons of the great temple complex of Karnak. Sweat glistened on her brow, her linen sheath clinging to her body in the oppressive heat. But 𝐒𝐴𝐻's discomfort was tempered by a sense of purpose, for she was one of the few women who had managed to carve out a role for herself in the male-dominated world of ancient Egyptian religion. As a chantress of Amun, 𝐒𝐴𝐻 was responsible for singing the sacred hymns and performing the intricate rituals that honored the mighty god of creation. It was a prestigious position, one that required years of training and dedication. But even as she took her place among the other chantresses, 𝐒𝐴𝐻 knew that her role was a modest one compared to the powerful male priests who controlled the temple. For women in ancient Egypt, religion was a complex and often contradictory force. On one hand, the pantheon of gods and goddesses included many powerful female figures, such as Isis, the goddess of magic and motherhood, and Hathor, the goddess of love and beauty. These deities were revered and celebrated in myth and art, their likenesses adorning temples and tombs throughout the land. But in the earthly realm of the temple, women were largely excluded from positions of real authority. The priesthood was almost entirely male, with women relegated to minor roles as chantresses or priestesses of female deities associated with fertility and childbirth. Even then, their duties were carefully circumscribed, their power limited by the whims of the male hierarchy. For 𝐒𝐴𝐻, the temple was both a refuge and a prison. Within its walls, she was free from the domestic duties that consumed the lives of most Egyptian women. the endless cycle of childbearing, cooking, cleaning, and tending to the needs of fathers, husbands, and sons. Here, she could lose herself in the rhythms of the rituals, her voice rising in sweet harmony with the other chantresses as they praised the glory of Amun. But even as she savored these moments of escape, 𝐒𝐥𝐞𝐞𝐞 knew that her place in the temple was tenuous at best. She had no real power here, no way to shape the course of her own destiny. Like all Egyptian women, she was ultimately at the mercy of the men who ruled her world, the priests who controlled access to the gods, the husbands who could cast her aside on a whim, the sons who would one day inherit whatever meager property she managed to accumulate over the course of her life. As the chanting reached a crescendo and the air grew thick with the smoke of incense, 𝐒𝐥𝐞𝐞 closed her eyes and tried to imagine a different kind of life. One where women were free to pursue their own paths, to make their own choices, to be valued for more than their ability to bear children and keep a household running smoothly. But even as the vision danced tantalizingly before her, she knew that it was little more than a mirage, a fleeting dream that would dissolve like mist under the harsh glare of reality. For the reality of life as a woman in ancient Egypt was one of constant struggle and subjugation. From birth to death, women were viewed as inferior to men, weaker in body, mind, and spirit. They were expected to be obedient, subservient, and above all, fertile, producing the sons who would carry on the family name and the daughters who would be married off as soon as they reached puberty. Girlhood was a brief and often brutal time, with little opportunity for education or personal development. While boys from wealthy families might be sent to temple schools to learn the arts of reading, writing, and mathematics, girls were usually kept at home, their days filled with the endless drudgery of household chores. As they entered adolescence, girls were considered ripe for marriage, often to much older men who had already established themselves in their careers. These unions were arranged by fathers or male guardians, with little input from the girls themselves. Once married, a woman was expected to bear children as quickly and frequently as possible, with little regard for her own health or well-being. Childbirth was a particularly perilous time for Egyptian women, with many dying from complications like hemorrhage or infection. Without the benefit of modern medicine, even a routine delivery could be life-threatening, and the toll on women's bodies was immense. Those who survived were often left weakened and vulnerable, easy prey for the diseases that ran rampant through the crowded cities and villages. For women of the lower classes, life was even harder. While the wealthy might have access to some of the luxuries and privileges of the upper echelons, poor women had little choice but to toil ceaselessly in the fields or in the workshops that produced the goods that fueled the Egyptian economy. They had no legal rights, no way to escape the brutality of abusive husbands or fathers, no hope of a better life for themselves or their children. Even the rare women who managed to rise above their station were still ultimately constrained by the rigid gender roles of their society. Take, for example, the story of 𝐼𝐻𝑡, a woman who is sometimes cited as the first recorded female physician in history. 𝐼𝐻𝑡 lived during the Old Kingdom period of ancient Egypt, around 2700 BCE. She was the daughter of a high-ranking official and was married to a priest of the sun god Ra. Despite her privileged background, 𝐼𝐻𝑡's accomplishments as a healer were remarkable for her time. According to inscriptions found in her tomb, 𝐼𝐻𝑡 was known as the chief physician, a title that suggests she had achieved a level of skill and knowledge that was rare for a woman in ancient Egypt. She was said to have treated both male and female patients, using a combination of herbal remedies, surgery, and magic spells to cure a wide range of ailments. But even as she achieved a measure of renown in her field, 𝐼𝐻𝑡 was still constrained by the limitations placed on women in ancient Egyptian society. She could not hold a formal position in the male-dominated medical establishment, and her skills were likely seen as an extension of her domestic role as a caregiver and nurturer. Moreover, the very fact that 𝐼𝐻𝑡's story has survived the centuries is a testament to how exceptional her achievements must have been. In a society where women's lives were often overlooked or erased from the historical record, the fact that we know anything at all about Merit-Ptah suggests that she must have been a truly remarkable figure, a trailblazer who defied the odds and made her mark in a field that was almost entirely closed to women. But for every Merit-Ptah, there were countless other women whose stories have been lost to time, women who toiled in obscurity, their talents and contributions unrecognized and unappreciated. Women like 𝐒𝐥𝐞𝐞𝐞, the chantress of Amun, who found a measure of fulfillment in her temple duties, but who ultimately had no real power or agency in shaping her own destiny. As 𝐒𝐥𝐴𝐻 finished her prayers and made her way back out into the blistering heat of the Theban streets, she couldn't help but feel a sense of weariness and resignation. For all the grandeur and glory of ancient Egypt, with its mighty pyramids and glittering temples, the life of a woman was one of endless toil and subjugation, a cycle of drudgery and despair that seemed as eternal and unchanging as the waters of the Nile. But even in the midst of this bleak reality, there were glimmers of hope and resilience. Women who found ways to carve out small spaces of autonomy and agency, who nurtured their own dreams and desires in the face of overwhelming oppression. Women like Merit-Ptah, who dared to defy the limits placed on her gender and make her mark in a male-dominated world. Women like 𝐒𝐴𝐻, who found solace and purpose in the rituals of the temple, even as she chafed against the chains of her own subordination. These women may have been brutally constrained by the realities of their time and place, but they were not entirely powerless. Through their quiet acts of resistance and defiance, through their tenacity and strength in the face of unimaginable hardship, they left a legacy that echoes down through the ages. A reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can find a way to endure and to hope. As the sun began to set over the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty streets of Thebes, 𝐒𝐴𝐻 made her way back to the small mud brick house she shared with her husband and children. The evening meal would need to be prepared, the children bathed and put to bed, the endless round of domestic chores attended to before she could finally rest her weary body and mind. But even as she went through the motions of her daily routine, 𝐒𝐴𝐻's thoughts kept returning to the temple, to the sense of purpose and meaning she found in her role as a chantress, to the fleeting moments of transcendence she experienced when lost in the rhythm of the sacred hymns. In those moments, she could almost imagine a different kind of world, a world where women were valued for more than their ability to bear children and keep a house running smoothly, a world where they were free to pursue their own paths and make their own choices, a world where they were seen as full and equal partners in the great dance of life. It was a vision that seemed impossibly distant, as unreachable as the stars that twinkled in the night sky above the sleeping city. But it was a vision that 𝐒𝐴𝐻 clung to nonetheless, a fragile flame of hope that she nurtured in the secret corners of her heart, even as the weight of her own oppression threatened to snuff it out. For in the end, what choice did she have but to keep going, to keep singing her hymns and saying her prayers, to keep tending to her family and her duties, to keep fighting the small battles that made up the fabric of her life? Like the great Nile that flowed ceaselessly through the heart of Egypt, 𝐒𝐴𝐻 knew that she too must keep moving forward, that even in the face of the most brutal adversity, the most unyielding oppression, the human spirit had an infinite capacity for resilience and renewal. And so she sang, her voice rising in sweet harmony with the voices of her fellow chantresses. A song of hope and defiance, of pain and perseverance, of the unquenchable yearning for a better world that burned in the hearts of women across the ages. A song that echoed through the halls of the temple and out into the streets of Thebes. A song that would carry on long after 𝐒𝐴𝐻 and her sisters had turned to dust. A testament to the enduring strength and courage of the women of ancient Egypt, and to the indomitable power of the human spirit to endure and to dream. As the last rays of the sun disappeared below the horizon, 𝐒𝐲𝐻 turned her face towards the darkening sky, towards the vast expanse of stars and planets and galaxies that stretched out into the infinite reaches of space. And for a moment, she felt a sense of connection to the women who had come before her and to those who would come after, to the great web of life that bound them all together across the centuries and the millennia. It was a fleeting feeling, but it was enough to sustain her through the long night ahead, enough to give her the strength to face another day of toil and struggle, enough to keep the flame of hope burning in her heart. For in the end, that was all any of them could do. To keep going, to keep dreaming, to keep reaching for the stars, no matter how distant or unattainable they might seem. And so the women of ancient Egypt endured through the rise and fall of dynasties, through the shifting sands of time and fortune, through the brutal realities of their own oppression. They endured, and in their endurance, they left a legacy that would echo through the ages, a testament to the resilience and the courage of the human spirit, and to the unquenchable power of hope in the face of even the darkest of times. It is a legacy that lives on to this day, in the stories we tell and the songs we sing, in the quiet acts of resistance and defiance that women everywhere continue to perform in the face of adversity and oppression. It is a legacy that reminds us of the indomitable strength of the human spirit, of our capacity to dream and to hope, to love and to fight, to endure and to overcome, no matter how brutal the odds may seem. And so let us remember the women of ancient Egypt, not as passive victims of their own oppression, but as active agents in their own lives and in the shaping of their own destinies. Let us honor their struggles and their triumphs, their pain and their perseverance, their unquenchable thirst for a better world. And let us carry their legacy forward into our own lives and into the lives of those who will come after us. Let us keep singing their songs and telling their stories. Let us keep fighting for a world where all women can live with dignity and freedom and hope. Let us keep reaching for the stars, no matter how distant or unattainable they may seem. For in the reaching, we honor the memory of those who came before us, and we light the way for those who will come after. This is the legacy of the women of ancient Egypt, a legacy of hope and resilience, of courage and defiance in the face of even the most brutal of circumstances. It is a legacy that belongs to all of us, to every woman who has ever struggled and dreamed and fought for a better world. And it is a legacy that will endure as long as there are those who remember and those who carry the flame of hope in their hearts. As the scorching sun beat down upon the golden dunes of ancient Egypt, life teemed along the banks of the mighty Nile River. Bustling cities hummed with activity as merchants peddled their wares, and scribes dutifully recorded the affairs of the kingdom. Monuments to the gods and the glory of the pharaohs towered above the landscape, their shadows stretching across the desert sands like divine sundials marking the passage of time. But amidst this majestic panorama of plenty lurked a darker reality, the harsh and often brutal existence endured by the women of this ancient realm. For while Egypt was a land of great prosperity and progress in many ways, it was also a society firmly rooted in patriarchal traditions that relegated women to subservient roles. To be born female in the time of the pharaohs was to be dealt a challenging hand by fate, one that promised a life of hardship, subjugation, and struggle. Of course, women in ancient Egypt did enjoy certain rights and privileges that set them apart from some of their contemporaries in neighboring lands. Unlike the women of Greece, for example, Egyptian women could own property, engage in business transactions, and even initiate divorce proceedings against their husbands. In the eyes of the law, they had a degree of autonomy that was remarkable for the time. However, this veneer of equality belied a much harsher truth, for despite these nominal freedoms, Egyptian women were still seen as fundamentally inferior to men, both socially and legally. They were excluded from positions of real power and influence, barred from serving as priests, scribes, or government officials. Their career options were largely limited to domestic work, and they were expected to defer to the authority of the men in their lives, be it their fathers, husbands, brothers, or sons. This lack of agency was particularly evident in the realm of marriage and family life. Egyptian girls were often married off at a young age, frequently to much older men, and had little say in the matter. Once wed, a woman's primary duty was to bear children, especially sons, to carry on the family name. But in an era without modern medicine, childbirth was fraught with danger, and it's estimated that as many as 1 in 3 Egyptian women died in the process of bringing new life into the world. Those who survived the perils of childbearing still faced a precarious existence as they aged. With life expectancies short by modern standards, many women outlived their husbands and found themselves dependent on their children for support in their twilight years. For those without family to lean on, destitution and struggle were all too common fates. Even women of great renown and influence were not immune to the limitations placed upon their gender. Consider the tale of Nefertiti, the legendary queen whose beauty and power have echoed through the ages. As the great royal wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, Nefertiti wielded considerable influence, and her image graced temples and monuments throughout the kingdom. Yet for all her status and celebrity, Nefertiti's fate was ultimately tied to that of her mercurial husband. When Akhenaten's reign crumbled amidst religious upheaval and political strife, Nefertiti vanished from the historical record, her final days a mystery. Some scholars believe she may have ruled briefly as pharaoh in her own right, but if so, her reign was short-lived and her authority tenuous. In the end, even the most powerful woman in Egypt found herself at the mercy of the men who controlled the kingdom. The spectre of mortality loomed large over the lives of all Egyptians, but it cast an especially dark shadow over the kingdom's women. In a world without antibiotics, vaccines, or modern sanitation, death was a constant companion, and the slightest illness or injury could spell doom. Childbirth, as mentioned, was a particularly perilous ordeal, with both mothers and infants frequently succumbing to complications like hemorrhage and infection. Even for women who escaped the dangers of the birthing bed, life was a relentless struggle against the ravages of disease. The Nile, though the lifeblood of Egyptian civilization, was also a source of parasites and bacteria that sickened countless people each year. Sanitation was rudimentary at best, and while the wealthy might have enjoyed some basic plumbing and toilets, the majority of the population lived in conditions that were ripe for the spread of illness. Egyptian medicine, while advanced for its time, could do little to alleviate the suffering of women beset by disease or injury. The famous medical texts of the era, like the Ebers Papyrus and the Edwin Smith Papyrus, contain a wealth of knowledge on topics like surgery, pharmacology, and obstetrics. However, much of this knowledge was geared towards treating men, with women's health concerns often given short shrift. Against this grim backdrop, the story of Merit Ptah shines like a beacon of hope. Recognized as the first recorded female physician in history, Merit Ptah blazed a trail for women in the medical arts. As a chief physician in the royal court, she would have tended to the needs of the pharaoh and his family, but one imagines she must have also turned her skills to the aid of the kingdom's women, offering what comfort and care she could to those neglected by a male-dominated medical establishment. For most women, however, the best hope for a tolerable existence lay in conforming to the rigid beauty standards of the time. The ideal Egyptian woman was slender and youthful, with smooth skin, elaborately styled hair, and dramatic makeup. To achieve this look, women went to great lengths, donning heavy wigs made from human hair or plant fibers, and contouring their faces with bold shades of coal, malachite, and red ochre. These beauty rituals could be oppressive and uncomfortable, especially in the scorching heat of the Egyptian sun. But for women with few other avenues to status and influence, they were a necessary evil. To appear old, unkempt, or overweight was to invite scorn and ridicule, and to risk being cast aside by husbands and society alike. Perhaps no woman in Egyptian history understood the power of image better than Cleopatra VII, the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic kingdom. Renowned for her beauty, wit, and political acumen, Cleopatra used her physical charms as a tool of statecraft, seducing the likes of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony to cement her grip on power. But even Cleopatra's carefully cultivated persona could not shield her entirely from the perils of being a woman in a man's world. Her reign was marked by constant power struggles with her male co-rulers and relatives, and in the end, she took her own life rather than face the humiliation of being paraded through Rome as a captive. In the spiritual realm too, women found themselves at a disadvantage. The Egyptian pantheon was filled with powerful female deities like Isis, Hathor, and Sekhmet, but their worship was often secondary to that of male gods like Ra, Osiris, and Horus. Women were permitted to serve as priestesses in some capacities, but they were excluded from the higher echelons of the religious hierarchy. A rare exception to this rule was the role of the chantress, a type of priestess who performed music and sang hymns in honor of the gods. Chantresses were highly respected and could even hold positions of authority within the temple hierarchy. But these women were the exception rather than the rule, and their elevated status was still contingent on their subservience to male priests and pharaohs. The story of 𝐸𝑠et, a chantress of Amun who lived during the 20th dynasty, offers a glimpse into the lives of these remarkable women. As a chantress, 𝐸𝑠et would have been trained in music, poetry, and religious rites, and would have performed in ceremonies honoring the god Amun. Her position would have afforded her a degree of prestige and financial security that was rare for women of her time. But even 𝐸𝑠et's privileged status could not fully insulate her from the challenges of being a woman in ancient Egypt. Like all Egyptian women, she would have been expected to marry and bear children, and her duties as a wife and mother would have likely taken precedence over her religious calling. And while she may have enjoyed some measure of autonomy within the temple walls, beyond them, she would have been subject to the same legal and social constraints as any other woman. For a select few women, however, there was one path to power and influence that lay open: the royal court. As the wives, mothers, and daughters of pharaohs, the women of the royal household could wield considerable sway, shaping policy and even ruling in their own right on rare occasions. But even this exalted status came with its own set of perils and limitations. Royal women were still subject to the whims and desires of the men who wore the crown, and their power was always contingent on their ability to navigate the treacherous currents of court politics. Those who overstepped their bounds or fell out of favor could find themselves quickly relegated to obscurity or worse. The story of Hatshepsut, one of the few women to rule Egypt as pharaoh in her own right, illustrates both the possibilities and the pitfalls of female power in the New Kingdom. As the daughter of Thutmose I and the wife of Thutmose II, Hatshepsut was well positioned to seize the reins of power when her husband died young, leaving only an infant son as his heir. For over 2 decades, Hatshepsut ruled Egypt as pharaoh, styling herself as a male king, complete with false beard and kingly regalia. Under her leadership, Egypt prospered, with successful military campaigns, ambitious building projects, and lucrative trade expeditions to distant lands. But Hatshepsut's reign was not without controversy, and her gender made her a target for those who sought to undermine her authority. In the years after her death, her successors would attempt to erase her memory, chiseling her name and image from monuments and temples across Egypt. Hatshepsut's story is a testament to the extraordinary resilience and determination of Egyptian women in the face of overwhelming odds. But it is also a stark reminder of the precarious nature of female power in a society built on male dominance. As the sands of time have swept over the once mighty civilization of ancient Egypt, burying its secrets and mysteries beneath the desert dunes, one truth remains clear. To be a woman in this world was to walk a tightrope between subjugation and survival, forever at the mercy of forces beyond one's control. It is a testament to the strength and spirit of these women that they endured, finding ways to carve out lives of meaning and purpose in a world that too often saw them as little more than property or chattel. Through their stories, we can catch a glimpse of the resilience and fortitude that sustained them through the ages. But we are also left to ponder what might have been had these women been granted the same freedoms, rights, and opportunities as their male counterparts. Would the course of history have unfolded differently, with women taking their rightful place as leaders, innovators, and visionaries? We can only imagine what wonders and achievements these remarkable women might have accomplished had they not been shackled by the chains of gender inequality. And in imagining, we can perhaps find inspiration to continue the fight for a world where every woman, regardless of her place or time, has the chance to reach her full potential. So let us remember the women of ancient Egypt, not just as silent shadows on the margins of history, but as the resilient, resourceful survivors they were. Let us honor their struggles and their triumphs, and let us work to build a future where their sacrifices are no longer necessary. For in doing so, we honor the timeless spirit of womankind itself, in all its strength, beauty, and enduring power. Royalty and power in ancient Egypt was a complex dance, with women often finding themselves in supporting roles to the dominant male pharaohs. Queens could indeed wield significant influence from time to time, using their proximity to the seat of power to shape the course of the kingdom. The most notable example of this was perhaps Queen 𝐤𝐤, the wife of Amenhotep III and mother of Akhenaten. 𝐤𝐤 was a formidable figure, depicted nearly as large as her husband in statues and reliefs, a rarity for a queen. She was actively involved in diplomacy, corresponding with foreign leaders, and even participating in important religious ceremonies, usually reserved for the pharaoh. Her influence over her son Akhenaten was also substantial, as evidenced by his early artworks, showing a young king taking counsel from his wise, powerful mother. But for every Queen 𝐤𝐤, there were countless royal women relegated to the background. The female relatives of the pharaoh, mothers, wives, sisters, and daughters, might share in the trappings of power and enjoy a life of luxury, but their authority was always circumscribed. They were expected to play traditional womanly roles, providing heirs, keeping the royal household running smoothly, and participating in religious rites honoring the gods. Independent action was rare and required great force of personality to pull off. The most stunning exception to this rule was, of course, Hatshepsut, the queen who declared herself king. The wife and sister of Thutmose II, Hatshepsut, initially served as regent for her young stepson, Thutmose III. But as the years went on, her ambitions grew. In a shocking move, she proclaimed herself pharaoh, adopting all the masculine trappings of kingship, from the crown and beard to male pronouns. For over 20 years, she ruled Egypt as a king, not a queen, commissioning grand building projects, expanding trade networks, and leading military campaigns. Depictions show her making offerings to the gods and even being embraced by them, just like a traditional male ruler would. It was a remarkable achievement, but also an uncomfortable one. Hatshepsut went to great lengths to legitimize her reign, but her efforts to be accepted as a male king suggest she understood on some level that a woman wielding such overt power in her own right was transgressive, bordering on unnatural in Egyptian society. And indeed, after her death, Thutmose III did his best to erase her legacy, chiseling out her names and images, relegating her groundbreaking reign to the shadows. For royal and upper-class women who wanted to make a mark, finding a way to work within the traditional system was often the only path available. Takhuet, a queen of the 25th dynasty, used her wealth and influence to become a major patron of the arts, commissioning religious texts, sponsoring temples, and even directing craftsmen as they decorated her beautiful tomb. She made the most of the opportunities her privileged position offered her, even if she could never step out fully from the pharaoh's shadow. In the end, the mighty civilization of ancient Egypt both exalted and constrained its women. Glorious depictions of feminine divinity in imposing statues and vivid paintings stood in stark contrast to the limited roles available to women in the mortal realm. No amount of gold and lapis lazuli could entirely disguise the fundamental truth that even the loftiest women were still subordinate to men in the unforgiving hierarchy of the desert kingdom. The sands of Egypt have long since shifted. The great monuments have crumbled. The gods are quiet. But if you listen closely, you can still hear the whispers of the women who lived and dreamed and struggled beneath the palms and pylons. Nefertiti applying her coal in the shimmering heat. Hatshepsut boldly donning the double crown. Countless mothers crying out in the agony of childbirth. Their voices echo softly through the ages, a reminder of the price of womanhood in an uncompromising world. And now, the story ends. Thank you for joining me tonight on the Sleepy History Channel. We've traversed the golden sands and shadowed lives of ancient Egypt, a land where divinity wore a woman's face, yet the mortal world denied her equal power. As the echoes of those forgotten voices fade into the desert wind, we're reminded that strength is not always found in freedom, but often in endurance, in the quiet defiance of those who refuse to be erased by time. Until our next journey together, rest well, dream sweetly, and remember, even in silence, the voices of women endure, shaping history with every breath. Good night.